Today I want to be able to talk to you about surfing motivation and how we use motivation to create behavior change. Before we get into actual motivation and surfing it, I want to tell you a little bit about why I really love this topic and how I came to care about the intersection between computer security and behaviors. So I have a traditional background in computer security focused on computer forensics, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with behavioral science. I really wanted to understand what makes people tick and how that applies to what we do with security. So I took that love and I started a team at Salesforce in 2012 that was responsible for internal security behavior practices for general employees as well as developers and for customers. And I took my experience as a practitioner there to start Elevate Security to help other companies leverage my experience and also see some traction in measurable change in security awareness. So the thing that drives my love across all of my experiences so far is this obsession of this question of what would it look like if people wanted to do security instead of had to? And what does that journey look like? So let's dive in and see what it looks like. Often, when I speak with heads of security or security teams, they ask me this often. They say, I want my employees to be better at security. How do I do that? So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the myths that I often see in security teams, especially in enterprises, around forming security behaviors in their employees, ways that behavioral science can actually influence that. And I'm really going to focus on motivation because I feel like we as practitioners and security experts understand what we want people to know. We don't necessarily have as much experience in getting them to love doing it. So the first myth that I often hear is education will change behavior. So by show of hands, who can empathize with this poor gentleman's experience of going through annual security training? Could you raise your hand if you've ever had to go through it and had this kind of experience? This tends to be the case for many organizations because current best practices in the industry tend to be a compliance-based training. Based on the audio-visual nature that security trainings are being presented in, it has about a 15% level of retention. No matter how good the content is, the way that it's being presented tends to have 15% of retention. So it's not really a surprise that depending on the article you read, something like 70 to 95% of breaches have some kind of human factor associated with it. So we're not really empowering employees in our organizations to have the most defense possible against attackers. So maybe it's the way that we've been communicating with employees, right? Maybe we should just get more creative about the ways we present information to our employees. The thing is, we've gotten really creative about videos, posters, newsletters, websites, in all sorts of formats. I've even seen security advice on lavatories. For me, the best analogy of this, the gap in communication and actual action is the Smoking Kills campaign. So anti-smoking experts have spent an incredible amount of resources trying to present videos and educational content. And there's even this photo of the subway having adorable bunnies telling you about how smoking kills. And yet, despite this investment of being very, very obvious about on your cigarette, smoking kills, there are over 36 million adults in the United States who are currently smokers. Ironically, 16% of all doctors are also smokers. So knowledge isn't quite getting us there. If we take a look at and apply this philosophy to security, we see, this is a study done by LastPass last year. They did a survey of users and they found that 59% know that a secure password is important. They found that 91% of people understand the risk of reusing passwords. And yet, at the exact same time, of those surveyed users, 41% choose a password that is still easy to remember, and 61% use the same or similar passwords. So if we know that this is a problem, what's the gap here? Why are people not actually doing something about this? So I want to introduce to you a concept of behavior change. So behavior change has three core components. For any one of us to do something different, security or otherwise, there are 3 things that need to exist at the same time for it to happen. We need to have the motivation to do it, the ability to do it, and trigger, something that reminds us to do it. So let me give you an example as it relates to running. Let's say I really want to start running. I could get really excited. I've subscribed to Runner's Magazine. I bought myself new shoes. I have the motivation to do it. Great. If I have a broken leg, I don't have the ability to do it, can't go running. If I have working legs and working shoes, but I don't care, I'm not going to go running. And if I don't have something in my life that reminds me, whether or not it's a calendar invite, setting up as part of my day, I won't be able to, even if I'm motivated, remind myself to regularly start going running and create this habit. So what this looks like when we put this together is a model presented by Dr. B.J. Fogg out of Stanford University, who says that motivation and ability have an inverse relationship to each other. When something is hard to do, it requires high motivation. When something is easy to do, it requires low motivation. And you see this blue line that exists here. If the trigger happens and the correct balance of motivation and ability exist in conjunction, then your behavior will succeed. If you do not have the right combination of motivation and ability, your behavior will fail. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So the next myth I want to explain is that you have to get people to care about security all the time. So people come to me and say, my users just don't care about security. Help me get them to care. The thing that I really want to drive home in this point is that not everyone in our ecosystems are going to be security experts. We, in our enterprises, hire a variety of skill sets, people who are creative and brilliant at sales and marketing, and they're not great at security because that's not what they were hired to do. Our developers may not be great at security because they're excellent at developers. And maybe the people who are in security are already in this room because they love security, and there's something about the way that we're wired and the interests that we have. And it is unrealistic to expect that other functions in our organizations will have the same level of motivation as we as security experts do. And so expecting that of them is only going to lead us to be disappointed. So if people aren't going to care as much as we do, they don't have high motivation, what do? So the good news is we don't actually always have to have high motivation to get security accomplished. So in this space where this superhero guy is hanging out right here, there is a really great intersection where someone has low motivation, but the behavior we're looking at is easy to do. So ability has a couple of functions to it. You can either make something more simple to understand, give someone knowledge, so cognitive ease, how to do it, or you can make the task actually easier to do, so it requires less effort on their part to do it. So if we take a look at some 3 key behaviors that I often look at, how do we get that action to be simple to do so people don't have to care as much? So first is having secure passwords for all sites. It's particularly difficult to have a unique 20-character passwords across something like 40-plus sites. Studies have been shown that we don't have amazing memory ability to do this, and so unless you're writing it down, which is not a great behavior, that's very hard to do. The easy aspect of it is installing a password manager or having mitigating factors like 2-factor authentication. Moving along, we see that reporting suspicious activity is another behavior that organizations really care about. So without an easy tool, an employee, when sent a phishing email, would have to look up the correct sending email address of their security team, or how do I report, what's the correct email address? I think it was something like security at, something like that. Look up what the correct guidelines. Do you want me to forward it at? Do you want me to download it and zip it up? What's the correct reporting structure? And then actually have the motivation to send it. What has been shown is that organizations that have just installed a big button that says report in inbox have seen incredible increases in the reporting structure, so making it easy to do. The last thing is stopping tailgating, so people who are walking in unauthorized into an organization in a secure space. It's very difficult to drive social accountability so that someone turns around and says, hey, can't walk in behind me, where's your badge, show that to me. Instead, organizations that have invested in things like a man trap, which allows one person to go in at a time, or in and out badging systems, have actually found that they no longer have to tell people don't badge because, or don't tailgate, because they have technical solutions. So the three things that is common amongst all these easier solutions is that they're technology solutions. And this is a point that I really appreciate making, is that if possible, technology should aid in changing behavior. And it is much more difficult to get someone to care than to give them the tools to do it. So as awareness practitioners, or someone who really cares about behavior change in an organization, where possible, invest in a technology solution to drive that behavior change so it becomes much easier of a task on your user. If, however, that is not a possibility for you, and for some reason, there are political reasons, there are budget reasons, there are lease issues that won't allow you to install man traps into your building, then you have to get people to care. This is an area where I think we still have a long way to go in the security space. So if something is hard to do, I have to get someone to really care about doing it. So what does that look like? So if you look back on your life and you say, where are all the moments in my life where I have had high motivation to do something? You'll notice that that motivation isn't consistent. Your motivation for anything will ebb and flow, and you'll have moments where you're really motivated to do it, and there are moments where you're not. The moments where you're really motivated to do something, whether or not security or otherwise, are great opportunities to do something that is very hard. So if I'm really motivated to go running, and running is very hard for me, I'm going to only go running on the times that I'm super motivated to do so. So how do we leverage and find those high points of motivation at an enterprise scale across employees so we can do this repeatedly and as part of an ongoing program? So I want to look at motivation as something we can harness. Motivation comes in two different forms: predictable and unpredictable events. So let's talk about predictable events for a moment. The big events in someone's life that they can see coming and might drive behavior change are things like the birth of a child, maybe ongoing cyclical things like payday, or if you are finding a new job and have a start date. There is something that is coming up in your horizon and you know it is coming, and as the event is getting closer, you are building up motivation around a behavior that might relate to that, whether or not it is updating your resume, getting more in shape, quitting smoking, whatever it is, you are getting more motivation towards that event. As that event happens, motivation usually tends to drop quite suddenly afterwards. When we look at unpredictable events on the other side, you have no idea the event is coming. In the real world, things like inheritance, winning the lottery, natural disasters, such as an earthquake. When the event happens, no one sees it coming, but you have an extremely high motivation right after it to do something like invest in an earthquake kit, start a retirement fund, things like that. When we apply it to security, there are certain types of predictable and unpredictable events that happen in an organization's life cycle. So on the predictable event side, we have things like audits. I have seen in organizations that don't have automated patching programs that as an audit comes up, the patching of their systems tend to get better right up until the point of the audit when they're great, and then patching behavior drops right afterwards. Red team exercise is similar. Obviously, it depends on whether or not you are on the testing side or the being attacked side. But I found that red team readouts tend to have really great opportunities for changing behavior. Whereas unpredictable events have great opportunities right after, whether or not it is a breach or an incident or something in the news that happens to a similar type of company as yours. So in his book, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg says that good leaders seize crises to remake organizational habits. So if you have something that's very hard to do in your organization, something that comes to mind is drive two-factor authentication across all of your organization, waiting for an unpredictable event, or even a predictable one, that occurs so people have high motivation, using that momentum to push something that is hard to do, like driving a new process, is a very valuable process consideration for security teams. So why don't we use money as more of a motivator? I want to tell you a quick story about two friends moving. So imagine a friend comes to you and said, hey, I really need some help moving my couch this weekend. Can you help me? There's no talk of pay. And you're like, but I really like this friend. I'd like to invest in this relationship. Sure, I'll help you move. So you move. At the end of the day, your friend says, thanks so much. Here's $10 for your time. And all of a sudden, you're like, what a cheapskate. I spent my whole Saturday helping you move. So what happened? Like, you were friends right before that moment, and now you have an extra $10. What's the big deal? So we have two different systems in our mind called marketing norms and social norms about understanding how we relate. Marketing norms is when we have a value of money versus an object, and social norms is how we relate to friends and peers. So if you start putting money onto the equation, you remove the possibility of someone doing something for altruism, for intrinsic value, for something that makes them feel better, for pride. So that takes us into different types of motivation. So I can't generate new motivation in you that you don't already have. But what I can do from a security perspective is tie security to something you already care about. Whether or not it is hope or the opposite of fear, I'm really looking forward to a promotion. I'm looking forward to doing well at my job or standing out in front of my peers for being excellent at security, or anything for that matter. You can tie something that's important, both positive and negative, and into security so that you're leveraging intrinsic motivation that people already have. You can also do extrinsic motivation. Money sometimes works for less cognitive skills, stuff that's pretty transactional. Both extrinsic and intrinsic motivations, whether it's coming from internal desire to do something different or something external, can motivate people, although the studies have shown that intrinsic motivation has had higher performances. So if you see the previous slide, he's like, well, I could punish someone, so fear, or I can reward them, so give them hope around some kind of outcome. Why is shame and blame so frequently used in security teams? If you can even see that on ongoing phishing tests, when a company sends out a test, and when you click on it, it immediately gets sent to training. It says, how dare you, you clicked on it, right? The blame and train approach. So is that a good tactic? Should we consider using it? I want to share with you one study that Dr. John Gottman out of Harvard University did in 1998. He interviewed 700 newlyweds for 15 minutes, and with 94% accuracy, he found that there were couples who were going to stay married in the next 5 years, and those who were going to get divorced. And what he found was the couples who stayed married had 5 positive exchanges to every 1 negative. Similar studies have shown that high-performing teams have 6 positive feedback comments to every 1 negative. Average teams have 2 positive to 1 negative, and poor-performing teams have 3 negative to every 1 positive comment. So if you look at your relationship as a security professional to the rest of an organization, focusing on positive exchanges with your employees, finding ways of giving them positive motivation to do behaviors, will create a longer lasting relationship, which is valuable in times of vulnerability. I accidentally owned myself. There's something wrong with my computer. Can you help me? So building trustworthy relationships between security and an enterprise is built on positive exchanges in appropriate ratio to negative ones, which is unfortunate because when I survey security teams, I found that on average about 20% have a formalized positive program, positive motivation program, in addition to their punishing. So how do you create positive motivation? What are the ways that you, as security professionals, can create opportunities to engage in positive experiences with your employees? These are a sampling of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, but status, you can have leaderboards that recognize people who have reported fastest or reported the most, for example. You can have competitions. The joy of just playing with somebody else comes from an intrinsic place. And so you can have bug bounties, capture the flags ways of securing development organizations where the joy of playing is enough. I found that when you add money, like the person who wins gets $1,000, you'll have less performance, less people show up than if you have the opportunity to showcase the first place winner, something that money necessarily can't buy. Altruism, people who do it because for the love of protecting their company. And if you add money to that, you take this away. Security champion programs are a great formalized way of recognizing people who excel for the good of the company. And access. Can you create programs where people have access to anything from a parking spot to concert tickets to lunch with an executive of their choice to access to going to a security conference if that's of interest, but something where they can't get on their own. And achievement. The last one is the joy of saying, I did this, and being recognized on a team scale. So as a final takeaway, I want to leave you with this idea that we as human beings are a balance of the things that we have to do and the things that we want to do, the ability and the motivation, and both need to exist at the right time, at the right combination to be able for a security behavior or any habit for that matter to change. So when something is hard to do, we need high motivation to do it. So where possible, make the thing easy. Invest in technology so you don't have to get people's hearts and minds bought in. But if you have to, leverage the things that are already happening in an organization, in the news. Know that it is much easier to get somebody to adopt two-factor authentication after you've had a pretty successful red team attack and you've showcased it to your organization. And make sure that you balance positive behaviors to negative ones. So give your employees kudos, shout out, thank you when they do the right things that you ask them to do instead of just punishing them for the bad stuff. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.